Kim Bennett stood at the entrance of the Galactic Medical Academy's main hall, her heart pounding against her ribs as she adjusted the collar of her standard-issue medical uniform. The crystalline spires of Proxima 7's most prestigious institution towered above her, their surfaces refracting the light of 3 distant suns. She had dreamed of this moment since she first learned about the interstellar exchange program, but now, facing the reality of being the first human student to walk these halls, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. The orientation hall buzzed with a cacophony of sounds, the melodic humming of Andromedons, the clicking mandibles of Arthropodians, and the subsonic rumbles of Jovian natives. Kim clutched her datapad tighter, her knuckles whitening as she scanned the room for a familiar face, not that she expected to find one. The Academy's acceptance rate for non-Federation species was less than 0.01%, and she had spent the last 3 years proving that humans deserved a chance at this opportunity. Professor Zlara, a towering centaurian with iridescent scales and 4 pairs of eyes, glided toward Kim. Her primary eyes focused on the human student while her secondary pairs scanned the surroundings, a typical centaurian display of multitasking that still made Kim feel slightly dizzy. Miss Bennett, the professor's translator, rendered her complex harmonics into standard galactic. Welcome to Proxima 7. Your test scores were remarkable for your species. Kim suppressed a sigh at the familiar backhanded compliment. She had encountered this attitude throughout her application process, the underlying assumption that humans were somehow less capable than their galactic neighbors. Thank you, Professor Zlara, she replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. I'm looking forward to contributing to the Academy's research on comparative xenobiology. The professor's scales shifted to a slight purple hue, indicating curiosity, or perhaps skepticism. Yes, well, you'll find our program quite rigorous. We've made certain accommodations for your physiological limitations, of course. She gestured to a nearby workstation that had been modified with what appeared to be a gravity stabilizer and atmospheric regulator. Kim bit back her initial response. She had faced these prejudices before, the assumption that humans needed special treatment, that their primitive biology made them unsuitable for advanced medical studies. Instead, she smiled and said, I appreciate the consideration, Professor, but I've undergone the standard Federation genetic optimization treatments. I can handle the same environmental conditions as my classmates. A group of Medusan students floated past, their crystalline bodies refracting light in complex patterns that Kim recognized as their primary form of communication. She caught fragments of their conversation through her translator. Human specimen, fascinating regression of evolutionary traits, requires constant medical monitoring. Kim straightened her spine, remembering her mother's words, let them underestimate you. It's their mistake to make, not yours. The orientation proceeded with a series of lectures on Academy protocols, emergency procedures, and ethical guidelines for treating multiple species. Kim took detailed notes, though she had memorized most of this information during her preparation years. She noticed how other students kept their distance, forming a subtle but distinct void around her seat. The isolation didn't surprise her. Humans were still relatively new to the Galactic Federation, and their reputation was complicated. During the practical demonstrations of basic medical equipment, Kim caught several of her classmates watching her with their various sensory organs. A young Arctarian named ZYXX made no attempt to hide his fascination, his bioluminescent patches pulsing with what Kim's cultural training identified as a mix of curiosity and concern. When she successfully calibrated a quantum cellular regenerator on her first try, his patches flared with surprise. You have experience with Federation technology? ZYXX asked during their first break, his translator struggling slightly with the complex harmonics of his native language. Kim nodded, allowing herself a small smile. I spent 2 years at the Human Federation Medical Institute in Singapore. We've been integrating galactic medical practices into our curriculum since first contact. She didn't mention the countless extra hours she had spent practicing with simulated equipment, the nights spent studying alien physiological texts until her eyes burned, or the additional genetic treatments she had undergone to ensure she could handle the rigorous physical demands of the program. The day progressed with a tour of the Academy's facilities, the zero-gravity surgical suites, the quantum imaging chambers, and the extensive xenobiology research laboratories. Kim's attention was caught by the advanced simulation rooms, where students could practice procedures on holographic patients of any known species. She had only read about this technology in research papers, and her fingers itched to explore its capabilities. Professor Zlara concluded the orientation with an announcement that made Kim's stomach tighten. Tomorrow, you will begin your practical assessments. These will determine your placement in advanced study groups. The professor's secondary eyes fixed on Kim. All students will be evaluated according to standard Federation criteria. There will be no special considerations. As her classmates filed out of the hall, Kim remained in her seat, reviewing her notes and adding annotations to her research database. She had known this wouldn't be easy. Humans were still proving themselves in the galactic community, fighting against centuries of preconceptions about their capabilities. But she hadn't come here to be coddled or to receive special treatment. She had come to learn, to prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars, and perhaps most importantly, to become the kind of doctor who could heal any species in the galaxy. Looking out through the hall's transparent walls at the stunning alien cityscape beyond, Kim allowed herself a moment of pride. She was here, against all odds and expectations. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, she had taken the first step toward her dream. The void of space visible beyond the city's protective shields reminded her of the vastness of her ambitions, but also of the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. She gathered her materials, straightened her uniform one last time, and headed toward her assigned quarters, ready to prepare for whatever the next day might bring. The emergency response training chamber hummed with energy as Kim entered alongside her fellow students the next morning. The massive hexagonal room stretched several stories high, its walls lined with adaptive hollow matter generators capable of simulating any medical emergency scenario. Professor Lara stood at the control panel, her scales shifting to a deep blue of professional concentration as she input the day's simulation parameters. Today's exercise will test your response to multispecies triage situations in variable gravity conditions, Professor Lara announced, her secondary eyes scanning the assembled students. You will be divided into teams of 3. Each team must assess and stabilize patients of varying physiologies while adapting to changing environmental conditions. Kim found herself grouped with ZYXX, the Arctarian from orientation, and Kval, a Zentarian medical student whose silvery exoskeleton reflected the chamber's lights in mesmerizing patterns. Kval's anterior sensory stalks twitched with barely concealed apprehension at being paired with a human, but she maintained professional courtesy. The simulation began with a subtle shift in the chamber's gravity field. Holographic patients materialized around them, a Jovian diplomat with atmospheric pressure trauma, an Andromedon suffering from radiation exposure, and a Medusan with crystalline fractures. Kim immediately activated her diagnostic scanner, moving with practiced efficiency despite the increasingly unstable gravitational conditions. Vital signs critical in the Jovian patient, Kim called out, her voice steady as she analyzed the readings. Kval, can you stabilize the atmospheric pressure around him? ZYXX, we'll need your bioluminescence to assess the extent of the Medusan's fractures. Kval moved to comply, her exoskeletal appendages extending to manipulate the emergency atmospheric regulator. The Zentarian's initial reluctance seemed to fade as she observed Kim's competent handling of the situation. The team worked in synchronized precision, each member contributing their unique biological advantages to the treatment process. The chamber's gravity continued to fluctuate, now oscillating between 0.5 and 1.5 standard units. Kim had trained for this, her muscles remembering countless hours in variable gravity chambers back on Earth. She kept her movements controlled and efficient, compensating for each shift with subtle adjustments to her stance. Without warning, a high-pitched whine emanated from the gravity modulators. Professor Lara's scales flashed alarm red as she rushed to the control panel. System malfunction. Emergency shutdown initiated. The gravity field began to collapse erratically. Kim's medical training kicked in as she saw Kval, whose heavy exoskeleton made her particularly vulnerable to sudden gravitational changes, losing her balance near a sharp-edged medical console. Without hesitation, Kim launched herself toward her teammate, using the unstable gravity to increase her speed. She reached Kval just as a gravity wave hit, powerful enough to send them both flying. Kim managed to push the Zentarian clear of the console, but the momentum carried her own body awkwardly into the edge. A sickening pop accompanied by a flash of white-hot pain told her exactly what had happened to her shoulder. The chamber's emergency systems finally engaged, stabilizing the gravity and dissolving all holographic elements. Kim found herself on the floor, her right arm hanging at an unnatural angle. Around her, students and faculty froze in horror, their various sensory organs fixed on her obviously dislocated shoulder. By the 7 moons. Kval's translator rendered her chittering exclamation. Someone activate the medical transport beam. She needs immediate reconstruction surgery. The Zentarian's exoskeleton had shifted to a pale green of distress, her natural coloring betraying her panic despite her professional training. ZYXXS bioluminescent patches pulsed rapid patterns of alarm as he consulted his medical scanner. Human bone structure compromised. Musculature severely displaced. Professor, their species is not designed to withstand such trauma. Kim would have laughed if it wouldn't have jostled her injury. The alien student's panic was almost endearing, their advanced medical knowledge clashing with their fundamental misunderstanding of human resilience. She could see Professor Zlara already reaching for the emergency medical beacon, preparing to summon a specialist team. The pain was significant but familiar. Kim had suffered this exact injury twice before, once during a rock climbing accident in Yosemite, and again during her zero-gravity training at the Human Federation Medical Institute. She knew exactly what needed to be done, and more importantly, she knew she could do it herself. Please, a Medusan student's crystalline form vibrated with concern, the patterns translating as extreme distress. Remain still, Human Bennett. Movement could exacerbate the catastrophic damage to your primitive skeletal structure. Kim saw an opportunity in this crisis, a chance to demonstrate something about human physiology that no amount of theoretical lectures could convey. She began to push herself up with her good arm, ignoring the gasps and warnings from her classmates. Kval moved to stop her, but Kim caught the Zentarian's eye with a steady gaze. Trust me, she said calmly, her voice carrying across the now silent chamber. This looks worse than it is. And more importantly, she managed a small smile, I know exactly how to fix it. Professor Zlara moved forward, her scales cycling through colors of concern and confusion. Miss Bennett, surely you don't intend to. The professor trailed off as Kim reached for her own shoulder, her trained fingers finding the familiar landmarks of her anatomy through the fabric of her uniform. The medical chamber erupted into chaos as Kim's fingers methodically explored her dislocated shoulder. Kval's exoskeleton rapidly cycled through distress patterns, her medical training warring with her instinct to intervene. The human musculature system is too delicate for self-manipulation. She chittered, her translator barely keeping up with her agitated speech. The risk of neurological damage is exponential. ZYXXS bioluminescent patches pulsed in rapid, emergency patterns as he consulted his medical scanner again. Professor, her endorphin levels are spiking. She must be experiencing cognitive disruption from the trauma. Standard medical protocol for species class M3 clearly states. I'm not in shock, Kim interrupted, her voice remaining steady despite the pain. And humans aren't exactly standard M3 classification anymore. She took a deep breath, using the techniques she had learned during her emergency medical training. Our species developed in a high-gravity environment with frequent physical trauma. We adapted. Professor Zlara moved closer, her scales shifting through shades of professional concern and scientific curiosity. Miss Bennett, while your species' evolutionary history is fascinating, surely you understand that modern medical facilities are better equipped to. A sharp gasp from the gathered students interrupted the professor as Kim used her left hand to carefully rotate her injured arm into position. The Medusan student's crystalline form vibrated at a frequency that the translator rendered as pure horror. She's attempting to manipulate the damaged appendage. The nerve damage will be irreversible. Actually, Kim managed through gritted teeth, human peripheral nerves have remarkable regenerative capabilities. She continued her careful assessment, years of medical training combining with personal experience. Our bodies evolved to handle this kind of injury. We developed specific muscle memory for joint relocations. Kval stepped forward, her exoskeleton now a pale shade of medical authority. Human Bennett, as your assigned team member, I must insist that we follow proper medical procedures. The Academy's insurance protocols clearly state. Did you know, Kim interrupted again, her fingers finding the exact position she needed, that human medical practices began with self-treatment. Before we had advanced medical facilities, we learned to handle our own injuries. She looked up at her classmates, seeing an opportunity to turn this into a teaching moment. Our bodies are designed for emergency repair. The room had grown eerily quiet, the various species present all fixated on Kim's methodical movements. A Jovian student's atmospheric bubble pulsed with anxiety, while an Andromedan's melodic breathing had shifted to a higher, stress-indicating frequency. Even Professor Zlara's secondary eyes remained locked on Kim's shoulder, her scales unable to settle on a single color. The fascinating thing about human joints, Kim continued, her voice taking on a lecturer's tone despite the pain, is their sacrificial design. Our ligaments are actually meant to give way under extreme stress to prevent more severe damage. She adjusted her position slightly, preparing for what came next. We literally evolved to be able to fix ourselves. ZYXX's scanner beeped urgently. Professor, her neural patterns are showing intense focus rather than confusion. She appears to be fully cognizant of her actions. His bioluminescent patches flickered with a mix of concern and growing academic interest. A ripple of murmurs passed through the assembled students as they processed this information. The Medusan student's crystalline structure reorganized slightly, shifting from horror to analytical observation. Kval's exoskeleton began displaying patterns that indicated intense data collection rather than pure distress. The key, Kim explained, shifting her weight carefully, is understanding that human medicine isn't just about external intervention. We evolved as persistence predators, capable of continuing after injury. Our medical traditions reflect this. She looked directly at Professor Zlara. Sometimes, the most efficient treatment is the one we can perform ourselves. The professor's scales had settled into a deep blue of academic fascination. Miss Bennett, are you suggesting that human medical practices incorporate an element of self-repair as a standard protocol? More than that, Kim replied, her fingers finding the final position she needed. We've developed specific techniques for different types of injuries. This particular method was first documented in ancient medical texts, though we've refined it over centuries of practical application. The chamber's medical sensors continued to record everything, their holographic displays showing Kim's vital signs remaining remarkably stable despite what her classmates considered catastrophic injury. Several students had begun taking notes, their initial horror transforming into professional curiosity. The human ability to remain conscious and functional after severe physical trauma was one of the reasons we survived as a species, Kim continued, her teaching instincts overriding her discomfort. We developed a high pain tolerance and specific biological mechanisms for emergency repair. Kval's exoskeleton had shifted to a pattern indicating intense learning. You mean your species intentionally maintained these primitive recovery mechanisms even after developing advanced medical technology? Not primitive, Kim corrected gently, adaptive. Sometimes the fastest and most effective treatment is the one you can perform immediately. She took another deep breath, preparing for the final step. And speaking of immediate treatment, the chamber's various medical monitors continued to record as Kim positioned herself for what came next. Her fellow students, initially frozen in horror, had transformed into an attentive audience. Even Professor Zlara had shifted from attempting to stop her to carefully documenting the procedure. The most important thing to understand about human emergency medical procedures, Kim said, her voice remaining steady, is that they're based on thousands of years of practical experience. She looked around at her classmates, seeing that she had their complete attention. We're about to demonstrate one of the oldest and most effective techniques in human medical history. Kim set her jaw with determination, a subtle expression that didn't escape Professor Zlara's multiple eyes. The professor's scales cycled through analytical patterns, her scientific curiosity now fully engaged. This isn't my first rodeo, Kim explained, a wisp of a smile crossing her features despite the pain. Before medical school, I worked as a rock climbing instructor in Yosemite National Park. Shoulder dislocations were practically an occupational hazard. Kval's exoskeleton shifted to a questioning pattern. Rodeo. My translator cannot contextualize this reference. It's an old Earth expression, Kim clarified, still focused on positioning her arm correctly. It means I've done this before. She glanced at ZYXX, whose scanner was still taking readings. Would you mind recording these biometrics? My medical file could use updated data on human joint realignment procedures. The Arcturian's patches pulsed with academic excitement as he adjusted his scanner settings. Fascinating. You're approaching this as both subject and physician. Kim nodded, then addressed the room at large. What I'm about to do might seem alarming to non-human observers. Our joints can make sounds during realignment that many species find distressing. She looked specifically at several students with heightened auditory sensitivity. You might want to activate your auditory dampeners. A ripple of movement passed through the chamber as several students adjusted their sensory input settings. The Jovian student's atmospheric bubble thickened slightly, while the Medusan rearranged its crystalline structure to minimize vibration reception. Professor Zlara raised a scaled hand. Perhaps those with more sensitive physiology should step outside for this demonstration. Actually, Kim interjected respectfully, this is an important learning opportunity. In emergency triage situations, you might encounter human patients who need to perform self-correction procedures. Understanding our physiological responses could be crucial for proper treatment protocols. The professor considered this for a moment, her primary eyes narrowing thoughtfully before she nodded. An excellent point, Miss Bennett. However, participation will remain optional. She gestured to the door, and 2 students with particularly sensitive auditory systems exited, though they lingered near the observation window. Kim turned her attention back to her shoulder, drawing a deep breath as she prepared for the final movement. The technique I'm using is called the Cunningham method. It focuses on muscle relaxation rather than force, she explained, her voice steady and professional. The key is to understand that a dislocated joint isn't just a mechanical problem, it's a neuromuscular one. With methodical precision, she positioned her injured arm across her body, using her good hand to support the elbow. Human muscles can lock up protectively around an injury. The trick is convincing them to release. Kval moved closer, her exoskeleton now displaying patterns of intense analytical focus. How do you accomplish muscle relaxation during acute trauma response? Controlled breathing, focused intention, and knowledge of specific trigger points, Kim replied. Our nervous system can override pain responses when properly directed. She demonstrated a deep breathing pattern. This increases oxygen flow and helps manage pain naturally. Kim closed her eyes briefly, concentrating on the specific muscle groups around her shoulder. When she opened them again, her gaze was clear and focused. Everyone ready? This will happen quickly. Without further preamble, Kim executed a smooth, deliberate movement, rotating her arm while applying gentle traction and pressure at precisely the right angle. A distinct pop resonated through the chamber as her shoulder joint slid back into its socket. The sound provoked immediate reactions throughout the room. The Medusan student's crystalline structure vibrated at a frequency that the translator rendered as profound discomfort, while several other students flinched visibly. ZYXXS bioluminescent patches flashed in patterns that indicated both alarm and fascination, his scanner beeping rapidly as it recorded the procedure. Kval's reaction was the most dramatic, her exoskeleton briefly flashed a bright warning color before she regained her professional composure. By the sacred hives, she chittered, her translator struggling to convey the mix of horror and awe in her natural voice. The skeletal realignment was audible. Kim rotated her arm carefully, testing the newly relocated joint. The relief was immediate and evident on her face. Perfect alignment on the first attempt, she confirmed, glancing at ZYXXS scanner for confirmation. No nerve damage, no vascular compromise. Professor Zlera approached, her secondary eyes fixed on Kim's shoulder while her primary pair studied the human's face. Miss Bennett, your species continues to surprise me. Most classified M3 organisms would be in recovery for several cycles after such an injury. Kim stood up slowly, still moving her shoulder in small, controlled motions. Humans have remarkable recovery capabilities when it comes to certain types of injuries. Our joint structure sacrifices some stability for greater range of motion and quick recovery. The professor's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue-green. And you learned this technique through formal medical training? Partially, Kim replied, but the basics were taught to me by my first climbing instructor before I ever considered medicine. Many humans know basic self-correction techniques for common injuries. She smiled slightly. When you evolve on a high-gravity planet with predators, quick recovery becomes a survival trait. The Medusan student had recovered enough to approach, its crystalline structure now organized in a pattern indicating intense curiosity. Human Bennett, your diagnostic scanner confirms complete joint realignment. How is this possible without nanite assistance or regenerative field application? Evolution's elegant engineering, Kim answered, carefully stretching her arm. Human ball and socket joints are designed to dislocate rather than fracture under certain types of stress, a built-in safety mechanism. That same design makes them relatively easy to relocate with the proper technique. As she spoke, Kim noticed the previously horrified expressions of her classmates transforming into something new, professional respect mixed with scientific curiosity. Even Kval's exoskeleton had settled into patterns indicating reassessment and analysis rather than distress. Professor Zlera activated the chamber's central holographic display, transferring the medical scanner data for everyone to see. Class, observe the human joint structure before and after Miss Bennett's procedure. The display showed detailed anatomical images highlighting the shoulder's repositioning. Note the complete restoration of articulation and the absence of structural damage. The professor turned to Kim, her scales now displaying the blue-gold pattern that indicated professional approval. Miss Bennett, would you be willing to document this procedure for our xenobiology database? Human self-correction techniques appear to be significantly underrepresented in our medical archives. Kim nodded, a sense of accomplishment warming her despite the residual pain. I'd be happy to contribute, Professor. In fact, there are several other emergency procedures humans have developed that might be worth documenting. ZYXXS patches pulsed with excitement. Like what? Are there other self-repair protocols in your species' medical knowledge? Quite a few, Kim confirmed, rubbing her shoulder gently. From controlling bleeding to splinting fractures to managing internal injuries until proper medical care is available. Humans have developed numerous techniques for emergency self-treatment over our evolutionary history. The chamber's atmosphere had transformed completely. What began as a crisis had become an impromptu lecture on human physiology, with Kim at the center of genuine academic interest rather than skeptical observation. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt truly seen, not as a curiosity or a fragile creature requiring special accommodations, but as a medical colleague with unique knowledge to contribute. Professor Zlera raised a scaled hand to silence the excited murmurs that had broken out across the chamber. I believe this incident calls for a change to today's curriculum. Miss Bennett, if you're physically able, perhaps you could lead a short seminar on human emergency medical procedures. The professor's scales rippled with academic interest. Your practical demonstration has raised questions that our standard xenobiology texts clearly fail to address adequately. Kim looked around at the expectant faces of her classmates and felt a momentary surge of anxiety. She had come to the academy to learn, not to teach, yet the opportunity to correct misconceptions about human physiology was too valuable to pass up. She nodded to Professor Zlera with newfound confidence. I'd be honored to share some insights, Professor, she said, rotating her shoulder carefully. Though I might need an analgesic for the inflammation. Kval's exoskeleton shifted to a helpful blue-green as she quickly retrieved a medical kit. Would a standard Federation pain suppressor be compatible with your biochemistry? She asked, her manner now entirely professional, without a trace of her earlier condescension. The standard formula works well for humans, Kim confirmed, accepting the small device Kval offered. She pressed it against her neck, feeling the cool rush of medication entering her system. Thank you. Professor Zlera gestured toward the central teaching platform. The floor is yours, Miss Bennett. The chamber's holographic systems are at your disposal. As Kim approached the platform, ZYXX called out, I've transferred all biometric data from the procedure to the main system. You can access it for your presentation. The transformation in her classmates' attitudes was striking. Just hours ago, they had viewed her as a curiosity at best, a liability at worst. Now they watched her with genuine academic interest and a new respect. Kim took a deep breath and touched the platform's interface, bringing up a holographic display of human skeletal and muscular systems. Human medicine has always been shaped by our evolutionary history, she began, expanding the shoulder joint display. We evolved as persistence hunters on a high-gravity world with significant environmental hazards. Our physiology reflects adaptations for survival in conditions where immediate medical care wasn't available. For the next hour, Kim guided her classmates through various aspects of human emergency medical procedures. She demonstrated self-administered field treatments, explained the logic behind wound management techniques, and outlined the remarkable damage control mechanisms built into human anatomy. The students asked increasingly sophisticated questions, their initial horror at her self-treatment evolving into professional curiosity. The key difference in human medical philosophy, Kim explained as she concluded her impromptu lecture, is our emphasis on functional recovery over perfect restoration. In emergency situations, our priority is returning to operational capacity as quickly as possible, even if complete healing takes longer. Professor Zlera's scales displayed a pattern Kim hadn't seen before, something her translator suggested indicated profound academic reconsideration. This challenges several fundamental assumptions in our comparative xenobiology curriculum, the professor admitted. We've categorized humans as fragile based on your physical parameters, without accounting for your species' remarkable adaptive strategies. The Medusan student who had been horrified earlier raised a crystalline appendage. Human Bennett, would your self-repair capabilities extend to more severe trauma? The Academy's emergency protocols for human students currently mandate immediate stasis field application for almost any injury. Kim couldn't help but smile. Those protocols might need revision. Humans can function effectively with injuries that would incapacitate many species. We're designed for endurance and recovery, it's built into our evolutionary history. When the session finally concluded, Professor Zlera approached Kim privately. Miss Bennett, I must apologize for my earlier misconceptions regarding human physiology. Your demonstration today was illuminating. The professor's scales shifted to a humble shade of blue-violet. With your permission, I would like to propose a series of seminars on human emergency medicine for our xenobiology department. I'd be happy to contribute, Kim replied, surprised by the offer. Though I'm still a student myself. Sometimes the most valuable teachers are those who bridge multiple worlds of understanding, the professor observed. Your perspective on medical treatment differs fundamentally from Federation standard practices in ways we've clearly overlooked. The following days transformed Kim's academy experience completely. News of her demonstration spread rapidly through the xenobiology department and beyond. Her morning routine now included answering messages from students and faculty curious about various aspects of human physiology. What had begun as a moment of crisis had opened unexpected doors. Kval approached Kim in the research library 3 days after the incident, her exoskeleton displaying patterns of social uncertainty. Human Bennett, Kim, I wish to express regret for my initial assessment of your capabilities, she chittered softly. My cultural programming included outdated assumptions about human resilience. Kim looked up from her studies and smiled. No apology necessary. I came here expecting to face misconceptions. The Zentarian's exoskeleton cycled through thoughtful patterns. The Academy's database on Earth species contained significant inaccuracies, particularly regarding your adaptive capabilities. Several of us have submitted formal correction requests based on your demonstration. Word of Kim's impromptu lecture reached the Academy's curriculum committee, resulting in an invitation to join a special research project on comparative emergency medicine. What had begun as simple survival knowledge from her climbing days was now being documented as valuable medical information for the entire Federation. Professor Zlera called Kim to her office a week after the incident. The professor's primary eyes focused intently on her as she entered. Miss Bennett, your contribution has sparked considerable discussion among the faculty. We've received requests from 3 other Federation medical institutes for your shoulder realignment data. Kim blinked in surprise. Really? It's just a standard procedure on Earth. That's precisely what makes it significant, the professor explained, her scales shifting to thoughtful patterns. What seems ordinary to you represents an entirely different approach to medical intervention, one focused on patient autonomy and immediate functional recovery rather than perfect clinical restoration. The professor activated her desk display, showing a proposal document. The Xenobiology Department is establishing a new research initiative on species self-treatment protocols. We would like you to serve as the human consultant while completing your studies. As Kim read through the proposal, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond her original goals. She had come to the Academy hoping to prove herself capable of keeping up with her alien classmates. Instead, she had revealed that humans possessed unique medical knowledge worth sharing with the broader galactic community. The semester progressed with Kim taking on this unexpected dual role of student and specialist. Her initial isolation transformed into active collaboration as classmates sought her insights on comparative physiology and emergency medicine. The research project expanded to include other human medical techniques, from field suturing to fracture management. During the Academy's quarterly symposium, Kim found herself presenting to a mixed audience of students, faculty, and visiting medical professionals. Her demonstration of various human self-treatment techniques generated so much interest that the session had to be extended twice. The Federation has always approached medicine from a technological perspective, she explained to the gathered crowd. But human medicine developed through thousands of years of necessity before we achieved advanced technology. We learned to work with our biology rather than around it. A distinguished Andromedan physician raised a question from the audience. Does this suggest that our reliance on medical technology has caused us to overlook natural recovery mechanisms in other species? Kim considered this thoughtfully. I believe each species develops medical practices that reflect their evolutionary history. Humans evolved with remarkable self-repair capabilities because we needed them to survive. Other species may have different, equally valuable adaptive strategies we could learn from. As the semester drew to a close, Kim received a notification that her research contribution had been accepted for inclusion in the next edition of the Federation's comprehensive xenobiology medical text. Her chapter on human resilience, evolutionary adaptations and emergency self-treatment would become standard reading for medical students throughout the galaxy. ZYXX found her in the research lab the evening after the announcement. His bioluminescent patches pulsed with congratulatory patterns. "Your impact has extended far beyond our original expectations, Kim Bennett," he said warmly. "The Academy's entire approach to comparative physiology is being re-evaluated." Kim smiled, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. "I never expected a dislocated shoulder to change galactic medical perspectives," she admitted. "That's the beauty of true science," ZYXX replied, his patches glowing softly. "Sometimes the most significant discoveries come from questioning what we think we already understand." As Kim packed her materials at term's end, preparing for a brief return visit to Earth, she reflected on how dramatically her experience had diverged from her expectations. She had arrived as an outsider, facing skepticism and misconceptions. She would return as a recognized specialist whose knowledge was reshaping galactic understanding of human medicine. Professor Zlara met her at the transportation hub, her scales displaying the rare gold-blue pattern of profound respect. "Your contribution extends beyond medicine, Miss Bennett," the professor said quietly. "You've reminded us that true interspecies understanding requires us to see each other's differences not as weaknesses, but as unique evolutionary solutions to universal challenges." Kim nodded, understanding the deeper truth in the professor's words. Her dislocated shoulder had revealed more than just human physical resilience, it had demonstrated the importance of perspective in medical science and beyond. What one species viewed as a limitation, another had developed into a strength. As she stepped onto the transport platform, Kim realized she had accomplished something far more valuable than simply proving herself capable of surviving at the Academy. She had opened a dialogue between different approaches to medicine, health, and recovery that would benefit countless patients across the Federation. The journey that began with a painful injury had revealed a profound truth: sometimes the greatest contributions come not from hiding our differences but from sharing them honestly with others. In helping her classmates understand humanity better, Kim had taken a small but significant step toward a more comprehensive galactic medicine, one that recognized and valued the unique adaptive strategies of all sentient beings.